Hi guys, now let's talk about ethnocentrism and relativism. What is your place in the world? How much after what do you know? From North America to South America, from Europe to Asia to the Middle East, from Africa to Australia. How much do you know about the daily lifestyle of the people around the world? What are the social norms and one-stop cultural perspective? Do you think everyone in a war behave the same as the people around you? And that's why we'll be talking about ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism is judging another culture solely by the values and standards of one's own culture. It is also a form of bias where we tend to immediately judge another culture as bad or wrong based upon their actions if their value is not aligned with our own beliefs. So, ethnocentric individuals judge other group relative to their own ethnic group or culture, especially with a concern for language, behavior, customs, and religion. So, these ethnic distinctions and subdivision serve to define each culture, ethnicity, unique cultural identity. An example of ethnocentrism in culture is the Asian cultures across all the countries of Asia. Throughout Asia, the way of eating is to use chopsticks with every meal. These people may find it unnecessary to find that people in our societies, such as American society, eat using forks, spoons, knife, etc. Since these countries use chopsticks to eat every meal, they find it foolish for other cultures to not use utensils similar to chopsticks. However, they do accept the fact that they use different utensils for eating. This example is not something extreme that could lead to genocide or war, but it is a large enough gap between these cultures for people to see their way of eating as the natural or best way to typically eat their food. According to William G. Sumner, ethnocentrism is defined as the technical name for the view of things in which one's own group is the center of everything, and all others are scaled and rated with reference to it. He further characterized it as often leading to pride, vanity, beliefs of one's own group's superiority, and contempt of outsiders. In the study of anthropology, ethnocentric are people born into a particular culture that grow up observing the values and behaviors of the culture will develop a worldview that considers their culture to be norm. If people then experience other cultures that have different values and normal behaviors, they will find that the thought patterns appropriate to their birth culture are not appropriate for the new cultures. However, since people are accustomed to their birth culture, it can be difficult for them to see the behaviors of people from a different culture from the viewpoints of that culture rather than from their own. Example of ethnocentrism, it includes religiocentric constructs claiming a divine association like divination, one nation under God, God's own country, God's chosen people, and God's promised land. Next is the cultural relativism. It is the principle that an individual person's beliefs and activities should be understood by others in terms of that individual's own culture. It is also refers to not judging a culture to our own standards of what is right or wrong, strange or normal. Instead, we should try to understand cultural practices of other groups in its own cultural context. For example of cultural relativism, instead of thinking fried crickets are disgusting, one should instead ask, why do some cultures eat fried insects? You may learn that fried crickets or grasshoppers are full of proteins in Mexico. It is a famous Oaxaca region cuisine and have been eaten for thousands of years as a healthy food source. It was established as accepted in anthropological research by Franz Boas in the first few decades of 20th century and later popularized by his students. Cultural relativism was in a part a response to Western ethnocentrism. In ethnocentrism may take obvious forms in which one constantly believes that one people are the most beautiful, value the most virtues, and believes the most truthful. Boas first articulated the idea in 1887 that civilization is not something absolute but is relative, and our idea and concept are true only so far as our civilization goes. However, Boas did not coin the term. Franz Boas argued that one's culture may mediate that does limit one's perceptions in less obvious way. He understands culture to include not only certain taste in food, art, and music or beliefs about religion. He assumed a much broader notion of culture defined as the totality of mental and physical reaction and activities that characterize the behavior of the individuals. Composing a social group collectively and individually in relation to their natural environment, to other groups, to members of the group itself, and of each individual to himself. Understanding of culture confronts anthropologists with two problems. First is how to escape the unconscious bounds of one's own culture, which inevitably bias our perceptions of and reactions to the world. Second is how to make sense of an unfamiliar culture. In the generalization, the ethnocentrism is the tendency to assume that one's own culture and way of life represent the norm or are superior to all others. In the cultural relativism is the viewing of people's behavior from the perspective of their own culture. Both these viewpoints or concepts present extreme views, while ethnocentrism leans forward intolerance in culture, relativism leans toward incredibly high tolerance of culture feature.